I went to summer camp several times when I was a Boy Scout, and it was usually pretty fun, especially the parts of the day where we could do whatever we wanted. Nobody was really interested in earning new merit badges, unless it was something cool like wakeboarding. All we really cared about was spending time in the woods and swimming in the springs to escape the heat. It was a good time just being away from home and our parents for a week, and the only thing missing for a scout was a girl to flirt with. At first I thought I would go to summer camp every year if I could. However, things changed when I was 14. After that trip I left my troop and never went camping again. It was the 4th day of summer camp, right in the middle of everything. As far as responsibilities went, it was an easy day for me and my friends. There were 4 of us. We ran around the main common area of the camp, used our allowances to each buy a souvenir knife at the camp store, drank some yoo-hoos and threw some tomahawks around between activities. Eventually 2 of us decided we were tired and sweaty and just wanted to sit in our tents and wait for dinner. But my close friend Joshua and I wanted to keep going. There was a network of trails that wound through all the different camps. We had already taken the path to the springs, so Josh and I wanted to explore a bit more. There were 2 of us, so we both carried full water bottles and snacks in our bags, along with knives and rope, a map and a compass. And I had a small first aid kit, so we thought we were prepared for anything we might encounter out there. We didn't plan on going far either, since we had to be back in less than 3 hours for dinner. We left our troop's campsite with plenty of daylight and headed towards a mosquito-infested area of the woods. The canopy provided us with pretty good shade. The air was humid and stuffy. We wanted to see what it was like further out, but all we found was that the trees were a bit taller. It wasn't long before we started chatting over the buzz of the afternoon insects, the kind of bonding you'd expect between 2 14-year-old boys in the woods. We mostly talked about girls and which ones we thought were ugly, and so on. I admit none of it was very classy. We jokingly suggested we could walk far enough to find our way to the Girl Scout section of the camp, which did exist but was well separated from our area. That's when our surroundings inexplicably started to change. Suddenly a wind came up, blowing away the warm, muggy air and replacing it with a cool, dry breeze. At first this was a huge relief for Josh and me, who had been sweating for hours even in the shade. It also seemed to drive away all the mosquitoes and gnats, which was a welcome bonus. But barely a moment later, the woods darkened quickly, and the sky above us, between the branches of the canopy, changed from vibrant blue to a pale gray. "Hey Josh," I said worriedly. "I think it's going to rain." "Don't say that," he agreed. "More like we're about to walk into a thunderstorm," I suggested. "Should we turn back?" "No," Joshua replied confidently, looking at his compass. "The trail we're on loops back towards camp. We're heading north now, which means we're right in the middle. We might as well keep going." "All right then. Fine," I said. Josh seemed pretty confident in his navigation skills, so I let him make the call to continue. However, the threat of getting soaked to the bone dampened the mood, and as such a silence fell over the conversation. We walked on, listening for the approaching thunder and waiting to feel the first drops of rain on our heads, but they never came. The darkness around us only increased, but the rain never arrived. "Hey Josh," I said again, this time more concerned, "can you check the time? Man, I think we might have missed dinner." Josh looked at his watch. "No way, buddy. We've only been gone." And then suddenly, Joshua trailed off and stopped abruptly. "What's wrong, man?" I asked. "My watch is dead," he said seriously. "How is that possible?" I thought you changed the battery before we came to camp." Joshua shushed me and started looking around. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I listened, but I heard nothing. In fact, I heard so much nothing that it filled me with dread. It was absolute silence, not a single sound in the surrounding forest. It was an unnatural silence, devoid of cicadas or even flies. For a minute I listened deeper into the woods with my ears, hearing only silence, until finally I heard singing. Angelic singing. It was so soft and quiet it was barely audible, but unmistakably the voice of a beautiful woman. Just from the look Josh gave me at that moment, eyes wide and a smile spreading, I knew he'd heard it too. "Oh, it's the Girl Scouts," he exclaimed. Before I could even reply, he plunged into the woods following the sounds. "Wait, Josh. Stop." I started to follow him, but the moment I was 10 steps off the trail, I realized I couldn't see enough to continue. It was as if the sky had fallen, the darkness like midnight, extinguishing the daylight in just a moment. A deep sense of dread filled my body, urging me to turn back. I backed up the 10 steps I had taken, without even turning around, until I felt the smoothness of the path under my shoe again. At that point, all I could hear was my own breathing and heartbeat, and the singing of whoever was in the woods growing louder and closer. But something was wrong. The sound was no longer coming from a single direction. Somehow it surrounded me, closing in. It was too much to bear, and I felt it exerting physical pressure on my body. I tried to cover my ears, but it was useless. It all merged into a single piercing shriek. Finally, I heard a scream. It was a child's scream. It cut through the cacophony, returning my surroundings to absolute silence except for the echo of one person's cry for help. "Josh!" I yelled into the woods, "Come back!" There was no response. A moment later, I heard a snap on the trail from the direction we had come. I hoped to see Joshua, but I didn't. There was no human figure around the next bend in the trail, only the shape of a tall woman, but composed of no flesh or bone at all, just an ominous light. As I contemplated whatever spirit it might be, it suddenly rushed towards me. What I did next was pure instinct. I abandoned Joshua and ran blindly down the path as fast as my body could carry me. I didn't stop until I got back to camp and collapsed on the ground. When I looked up, I saw that everything was different. The sun was shining, the woods were alive with birds and insects, and all my friends came over to see what was wrong with me, why I was so agitated and nervous. I couldn't get a word out for hours. When I was finally able to tell the scout leaders what had happened, they didn't believe me. They sent out a search party to find Joshua, but they couldn't find a single trace of him. Even the police could never locate him. He just vanished. Suspicion eventually fell on me because the story I told was so unbelievable. So to avoid being committed to a mental institution, I changed my official story to say that I lost track of him when we separated to pee on different trees, and then I turned around for a minute, and he was gone. And in my worry and panic, I thought I saw something that wasn't there. But it's all lies because I know what happened. But in the years since, nobody has believed me. A few months ago during spring break, I sent you guys a story about something that happened between a friend of mine named Louise and her creepy ex-boyfriend, Pablo. Well, there's a part 2 to that story. It was around 5 a.m. at our usual friend group hangout spot. Pablo suddenly showed up and convinced Louise to ride with him in his car instead of sleeping off her buzz in her own car. And, as expected, it was just a ploy to basically kidnap her and do God knows what. I was the only person nearby at the time, and out of suspicion, I followed them in my car and was able to prevent what was about to happen. Many comments under that video rightly said that if I were her friend, I should never have let her get in his car, and that's true. Some people even said I was kind of an idiot for having feelings and trying to be some kind of knight in shining armor, but honestly, I just want to protect the people I care about. Unfortunately, what happened last spring break was just a prelude to what happened last week this summer. It's August as I'm writing this, and Louise has been back in town since June. Nobody had seen Pablo, her clingy and mentally unstable ex-boyfriend, since the attempted kidnapping. The owner of the place we frequent made it clear to everyone that Pablo was banned from the premises, which made Louise feel a bit safer. However, when someone is seriously obsessed, and when that obsession combines with substance abuse, sometimes they'll find any way to push the boundaries and eventually cross them. This is the case with Pablo. All summer, nobody even mentioned his name until recently. His name started circulating, whispered like a ghost. Our friends were sure they had seen him lurking in the shadows of the parking lot, But when they went back out, no one was there. I had a feeling something was wrong, but I didn't fully trust my instincts. A few nights ago we were hanging out at the bar after closing time, 4 or 5 of us in total, including the owner. I ran out of cigarettes, but I remembered I had another pack in my car, so I went out to grab some. As per the after-hours protocol, the door was locked behind me until I returned. It was a little after 3 a.m. I recognized every car in the parking lot as belonging to my friends, so I was pretty sure everything was safe. I got to my car and opened the door to reach for the pack of cigarettes in the cup holder, but as I leaned in I felt someone push me. Quickly, I jumped out of my car and looked back at the person who pushed me. To my astonishment, it was Pablo, looking more strung out and addicted than ever. He was standing in front of me, having cornered me against the car door. "Hey idiot. Long time no see, huh?" he sneered. "You were inside with Louise, I assume. Getting cozy with her." He gestured towards the bar where Louise was also parked. "Oh, let me guess, you see her out here in the parking lot, coming to grab some condoms." I could tell Pablo was high on something from how fast he was talking, which only meant he was more unstable than usual. "No way, man. Not at all. I swear I have a girlfriend now," I said, holding my hands up in surrender. "I'm just grabbing some cigarettes, man. Look." Then I showed him the pack in my hands. Instantly, he swatted it away, knocking it into a nearby drain. "Don't lie to me, Spencer," he hissed. "I know you've been trying to get into her pants for months. You turned everyone against me." "That's not true at all, man. I swear I have a girlfriend now." I tried to reassure him. I knew this would probably just make him angrier, and it did. He yelled something unintelligible and lunged at me, but I managed to jump back into my car seat and slam the door shut before he could reach me. Just then, he screamed in pain, and I realized his finger was caught in the door. He pulled it open to free himself, but I immediately backed up and locked the door. In his pain and rage, Pablo started pounding on the window, threatening me through the glass. So, I pulled out my phone and called the bar owner. "We've got a Pablo problem," I said gravely. "Please tell me you're kidding," he replied. "No, I'm not kidding. He's literally out in the parking lot right now, acting crazy," I answered. The owner came out quickly, cursing. "No way," I muttered in disbelief as I saw Pablo move away from my car and run towards the bar. I jumped out of the car and ran after him, trying to reach him before he got to Louise, who was just coming around the corner. The look on her face said it all as soon as she saw Pablo running towards her. She quickly turned around. Unfortunately, I couldn't catch Pablo. He had a head start and plenty of cocaine in his system fueling him. But luckily, by the time I reached the back door of the bar, he was already pounding on it trying to get in. His finger was cut and bleeding, and he barely noticed me. Just as the owner came out to push him away and scold him. "Get out of here, man. You're banned. If you come back again, I'm calling the cops," she said as she shut the door behind her. Behind the owner, a friend of mine was inside, signaling for me to come in. I followed him silently and stepped inside. The last thing I saw was Pablo running off, nose bleeding, before the door closed. I can't blame Louise for being pretty shaken up by the whole situation. I mean, imagine going outside to sleep in your car, and the first thing you see is some crazy person obsessed with you running straight at you. Over time, Pablo's appearances haven't stopped. Every time someone walks alone across the parking lot late at night when it's dark, he's always lurking just out of sight, escaping as soon as he's noticed. My friends don't let Louise walk to her car alone anymore, and she's been spending more time at home. I think this is getting ridiculous, honestly. It's time for harassment charges or a restraining order, or maybe it's time we all get 100% real and actually stop this guy when he crosses the line, because clearly a broken nose and a head full of drugs weren't enough of a warning. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking. I used to work as a counselor at a small summer camp. It was my first job when I was 17 years old. It was the most fun experience I could possibly have had at any job at that age, and it allowed me to get away from my parents' home for a month. I didn't exactly come from an ideal environment. So there were 5 buildings at this camp: the boys' dorms, the girls' dorms, the counselors' dorms, the main building which we called the lodge, and a small bathhouse building. Inside the lodge were the cafeteria, the main office, and the nurse's office, where kids who suffered an injury were taken. The kids had a 9 p.m. curfew, meaning they weren't allowed outside the dorm buildings after that time. I made good friends with a guy named Klaus, who was 3 years older than me, but we got along well. It was a Friday night. I remember because I knew it was the start of the weekend. For fun, Klaus and I went with 2 female counselors, whose names I won't mention for privacy reasons since I haven't seen them in many years. The 4 of us went into the woods to smoke a little. One of the girls was mid-sentence when we just heard the crunching of leaves nearby, followed by what was surely a footstep. We all turned our heads simultaneously in the same direction and heard it. Then, a few seconds later, there was a blinding flash of light. At first, we didn't understand what was happening. We were all confused. We decided to end the smoking session abruptly and left the woods at an extremely fast pace. Back at camp, we immediately felt much safer, but we became paranoid, thinking we were being watched by one of the camp directors, and that the flash was a photo being taken of us. We would surely be fired if we were caught smoking marijuana. So, we all ran back to our respective dorm buildings in a state of paranoia. But when I smoke marijuana, I get extremely paranoid and overanalyze everything. So, while lying in my bed, this was eating me up inside. I wondered if it really was a camera flash and who had taken that photo. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to go to the lodge and see if any supervisor was still working and tell the truth. Every counselor had a key to the building, so I unlocked the door leading to the cafeteria area, and the door slammed shut behind me. As I entered the dark and empty building, the only light came from the hallway I would walk down to get to the main office, hoping someone was still working. You might think I was crazy for doing this, but I'm not exaggerating when I say I get paranoid, and I really couldn't afford to lose this job over something that wasn't even my idea. But I wanted to find out if a supervisor had seen what we did. As I walked down the hallway towards the office, I quickly noticed the office light was off. Nobody was in the building. At that moment, I heard the familiar sound of the cafeteria exit door I had just come through closing again. Was I seen entering the building? Was I being followed? I hid behind the hallway wall, peeking around, waiting to see who would enter the hallway. But nobody did. However, it took longer than it should have for me to realize that something was peeking around the cafeteria door. It was a person's head. They were doing the exact same thing I was, looking in my direction. When I realized this, the sound didn't matter anymore. I ran as fast as I could to the nearest exit door, stomping hard on the wooden floor, and ran to the counselor's dorm, where 3 other counselors were still relaxing in the common area. One of them was Klaus. I told him, and only him, what I had just seen. I didn't know what to think other than that I was being followed. I think Klaus could tell I was a bit more paranoid due to the marijuana, so he told me to just go to my room and lock the door. He made sure the main entrance door to the building was locked because I probably scared him that night too. I stayed awake for a while, nervously thinking. There were so many unanswered questions from that night. The beds in each counselor's room were right next to a window with no blinds, so moonlight would stream in on clear nights, but not on this cloudy evening. It was just pure darkness. But after several hours in bed, my room filled with light. But it wasn't normal light. It was a flash. There was no thunder, not even rain. I looked out the window and saw only the silhouette of a person outside. When they noticed me, I saw their hand wave at me. That was the last straw. I left my room, calling for Klaus. He was already asleep by then, so I knocked on his door until he opened it. I told him the man who had followed me was at my window, So, he went with me to check, but as expected, he was already gone. Klaus asked me if I was still feeling the effects of the marijuana. I told him that wasn't the case at all. Hours had passed. I asked him if we should call the police or something. He said no. He told me I should sleep on the floor of his room with my blankets, if it would help me feel better. I think he wanted me to do that because he was scared too, just like me. Although I didn't understand why he didn't seem to be taking this seriously since he had also seen the initial figure in the woods with me. I slept in his room. I didn't want to sleep alone. I was way too scared. The next day I went to the main office to talk to one of the supervisors. She really didn't know what to do. She didn't call the police, but gave me permission to call them if anything else happened. But nothing else happened. At least not until the last day of work for the counselors. On that day the kids had already gone home, and it was the day we were supposed to pack up and leave. I woke up to find 4 photos taped to my window. An enlarged picture of me in the woods that night, with Klaus and the 2 girls. A second photo of me sleeping in my bed. A third photo of me entering the main lodge building that night, when we had been smoking, confirming I was watched and followed. And the fourth photo, an enlargement of my car's license plate. I took the photos and showed them to the same supervisor. She kept them as evidence after writing down my whole story, including the part about smoking marijuana. That was many years ago, and nothing ever happened again. But I was terrified that the photo of my license plate was some kind of threat, that someone would follow me. I still don't know who took those photos. I work as an emergency room nurse in a large hospital and was on night duty that night. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. It was a large hospital in the city center of my hometown, with an entire hospital district in the area. The children's hospital was right next door, and the cancer ward wasn't far away. It was a warm summer night as I parked my car in the employee parking lot. The security guard checked my badge and let me pass. I parked and walked to the entrance as I often did. As I entered the building, the solemn tranquility of the night was replaced by the frantic hustle and bustle of a large city emergency room. You would hardly think it was night in this place. The bright neon lights illuminated the busy hallway, giving one an unmistakable feeling of daytime. The next few hours passed fairly normally as far as my job is concerned. The work is generally incredibly hectic, and this night was no different. Basically, it was a typical crazy night, but things reached another level when a new patient came to the emergency room. He came in covered in blood, holding his stomach with a pained expression on his face. He appeared to be about 40 years old with long hair, a short beard, and he was wearing blue jeans. Another nurse and I went to him and helped him get to the operating room. We cut open his shirt to find the source of the bleeding. His flannel shirt was heavily soaked with blood. It should have been yellow with a checkered pattern, but it was impossible to tell. All I saw was red. As we looked at his exposed upper body, the wound was easy to see. It was a clear knife wound in the abdomen on the right side of his body. I quickly stopped the bleeding and stabilized his condition. Even though it's hard to believe, such things were quite common. The other nurse and I were well able to handle the situation. What happened next is what really frightened me. I was alone with the man. He was conscious but quiet. The knife wound was the only serious injury, but I couldn't help but notice several other injuries on his body. They weren't severe enough to require emergency treatment, but there were clear scratch marks on his arms and face. There were deep and long scratch marks in rows of 3 or 4. They were certainly made by nails. My experience is in healthcare. I am not a detective and do not have the skills to analyze the meaning of a particular type of injury, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But these scratch marks seem to be defensive. I was pretty sure of that. This man had done something to someone. My gaze slowly wandered from the man's arms to his face. He turned to me at the same time, and our eyes met. We maintained eye contact for several seconds. My mind was on high alert. Will he know that I know? I thought at that moment. He tried to grab my arm, but luckily my reflexes were faster than his, and I quickly left the room. Fortunately, the police were already there, as is customary when there's a stabbing. I told the officers what I had seen, and he assured me that they would investigate it. The man was treated by my colleague for a few more hours, and eventually the case was handed over to the police. I never found out exactly what happened between this man and the person who was involved, but my gut feeling tells me that it was not good news. All I can do is hope that the other person came out in better condition than he did. I have worked at a local gas station for a few years. It was the job I had throughout high school, and after I graduated, I kept it for a year or two while I sorted things out. I started doing night shifts when I didn't have to go to school anymore. The pay was better, and for a few other reasons, I preferred it. The store never really got crowded at night. The gas pumps were automatic, and almost everyone paid at the pump instead of going inside, so it was pretty easy. Besides, I've always been a night person. Some would say I was a video game junkie, and they'd be right. I was already almost a night person anyway, so the decision to do night shifts was pretty easy. The gas station was located on the corner of a quieter street. There were 4 gas pumps in front, and a few garbage containers on the side. I took out the trash every morning at the end of my shift, and the garbage truck came right after I left, around 5 a.m. It was around 4 a.m., and so far everything had been quiet. I don't think I saw more than 3 or 4 customers in the 6 hours I worked. I was standing behind the counter, looking at my phone. I used this time to do some reading and check social media. The empty store was silent, except for a dull hum of the neon lights hanging from the ceiling. I looked up from my iPhone screen as a car drove into the parking lot. It was an older Pontiac, with some noticeable dents and green paint, with various rust spots. One strange thing was that the headlights were off. It was very dark, and driving without headlights was dangerous at that time. It didn't drive to any of the gas pumps, and I couldn't see where it had parked. I thought it was just someone driving around and turned back to my phone. No more than a few minutes passed when I heard a loud bang from the side of the building where the garbage containers were located. It sounded like someone had opened the lid and slammed it against the side of the building. Whoever was in that car must have been throwing something away. I thought that people do that from time to time. It's not allowed, so I usually go out and tell them that they can't use the containers. I left the counter and went through the front door. As I got closer, a shiver ran down my spine. Something felt wrong. Although I wasn't sure what it was, I decided to proceed cautiously. I nervously peeked around the corner and saw the car parked in front of the garbage area. A dark figure was standing next to the car, but I couldn't make out anything about him. It was too dark. I stood there for a few seconds and watched, but I couldn't tell what he was doing. Although I knew he must have been throwing something away, there was something creepy about this guy. I can't exactly explain what it was, but for some reason I decided not to reveal myself. I quietly returned to the store and went back to my place behind the counter. I felt a great relief when I saw the car drive past the gas pumps. There were no more customers for the rest of my shift, which only lasted an hour. As I said, I took out the trash every morning before I finished, so I collected the few garbage scraps in each of the trash cans in the store and put them in a large black garbage bag. I turned on the light switch on the other side of the building, where the garbage containers were located. As I walked to the container, I remembered the creepy guy from an hour ago. Although I hadn't thought to check what he had thrown away, I realized that I was about to find out. The bright light bulbs illuminated the green containers like spotlights, as if they were part of a strange exhibit in some kind of modern art gallery. I had to squint as I got closer. As I got to the next container, I opened the big lid, and it slammed against the side of the building, causing the familiar sound. Before I threw the garbage bag, I leaned over and looked inside. What I saw shocked me so much that I dropped the garbage bag on the floor. There was a stack of black garbage bags, and at least one of them was dripping red liquid. I had seen enough. I ran into the store and locked the door, then hid behind the counter. I frantically dialed the emergency number and told the operator everything. My hand was shaking so much that I could hardly hold the phone. The police came quickly, and indeed there was a body in the garbage container. I did my best to give a description of the guy, but like I said, it was so dark without any light that I really couldn't say what he looked like. However, I was able to give them a description of the car, and based on that, they were able to track down and arrest the guy. As of now, he is awaiting his trial for murder, and I hope to testify as a witness. I've experienced strange things during my night shifts, but that is by far the most terrifying. Although it was terrifying, I continued to work night shifts for several more months. I haven't experienced anything like that since, and I hope I never will again. My father used to work as a corrections officer at the state prison in the town we lived in. Although he used to love his job, he quit shortly after this incident, and given what happened, I don't think anyone would hold him accountable for it. He was working the night shift at the time. By and large, it was pretty relaxed. The inmates were locked in their cells during his shift. He used to tell me about some crazy things that happened during the day, the fights, riots, and anything else you can imagine. The night shift, however, was really quiet and relaxing. He used to say that once you got used to the sleep schedule, it was really the best option. My father patrolled the prison several times per shift. Sometimes he drove one of those guard trucks or monitored from one of the towers. That evening, however, his supervisor told him to check the prison chapel. There wasn't much to do, he told me. You just had to go and make sure that no one was there who wasn't supposed to be. He walked across the yard to the chapel. The large empty space gave off an eerie feeling. The bright floodlights on the prison wall cast a long shadow of his body as he walked past the empty basketball courts. He reached the main hall of the chapel, and as he did so, a feeling of nervousness overcame him. At that point, he didn't know why. So he pushed open the large oak door and stepped inside. He turned on the lights and started checking some of the small rooms in front of the building. After a few minutes, a man came out of the office in the back of the chapel. He appeared to be another guard. He was wearing the same uniform as my father. My father didn't know this guy, however. It wasn't that unusual since sometimes the day shift guards would take on a night shift to earn extra money or to fill in for someone. Nevertheless, he was confused because his supervisor had told him to check the chapel. Why would he do that if someone was already there? My father asked the man, "Are you here to check the chapel?" "Yes, I'm taking care of it," the man replied. My father stood there confused for a few seconds, then said, "Oh, okay. I'll let the boss know." He left the chapel and returned to his supervisor's office in the main building. His supervisor looked up from his desk and said, "How did you finish so quickly? You couldn't have checked the whole area in such a short time." Another guard was there. He said he would check it. My father replied, "All right, as long as someone checked it," he said. At this point, his boss was confused. He assumed that the other guard had been sent there by someone else. If his boss didn't know, then who was this guy? 3 days later, my father was walking through the prison corridors and stopped to look at the display case. There were several awards and old photos of other guards from past times. As he was flipping through the photos, he saw something that made his heart sink. One of the pictures was a memorial to a guard who had been killed in a riot about 20 years ago. The photo showed the guard that my father had seen in the chapel that evening. He had never believed in the paranormal, but this experience changed his mind. He thought it was better not to tell his colleagues for fear of being laughed at, and soon after he left the job and changed careers. Although this was a terrifying experience for him, it is one of his favorite stories to tell. I have heard it more than a few times, and although I was unsure at first, I really believe it. I am a 27-year-old man and live with my fiancée in Berlin. Currently, I work as a teaching assistant for young people with special needs in a school not far from the Berlin National Park. I have worked in several schools and children's homes, and these buildings, especially the children's homes, are often old houses or renovated villas. This story took place in 2013, when I had just started working as a caretaker in a home for young people and young adults aged 18 to 30 who suffered from autism, brain damage, and behavioral disorders. The home where I worked was quite large. It had 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a playroom, a study, and 5 bedrooms. It also had a huge garden with a garden house and an activity room overlooking the fields and forests. I had been working there for about 3 weeks and mainly had the night shift from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. My job was to make sure that all the residents were quiet at night and then to clean before the day staff took over. Normally, I was finished with all my tasks around 1 a.m. and spent the rest of the night listening to anyone who woke up, watching TV, reading my university books, or playing games on my phone. On one particular night, a young man named Marcos, a fictitious name to protect his identity, was particularly restless. He was not very tall, but he had a lot of strength. Once he got angry and threw an employee through the patio door because he had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before drinking it. He couldn't form complete sentences and communicated with quite simple words that he put together in a way that he understood. For example, he said Mark make breakfast when he wanted breakfast, or Mark go out when he wanted to go out to play. Generally, he was well behaved and could be quite funny when he wanted to, but he was known for his temper. Around 11 p.m., Marcos got up and went downstairs to get a drink. I stood at the door and watched him to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself. Then he went up the stairs without any problems. I stood on the bottom step and watched his door for about 15 minutes to make sure he didn't wake up any of the other residents. Once he had calmed down, I went back to my work. The room below Marcos's bedroom was a common living room with board games, a TV, a sofa, books, and the like. I was just dusting and wiping the floor when I heard something fall in the room above. I knew that Marcos was prone to outbursts of anger when he was frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on the door while preparing to open it myself with the key. When I opened the door, he looked at me. He looked quite calm, and his eyes were probably half closed, as if he was sleeping. I asked him if he was okay, and he nodded and gave me a thumbs up. He always did that when he was in a good mood and not stressed, so I left him alone and told him to be careful because I thought he had accidentally dropped something. An hour passed, and I was just in the kitchen cleaning the sink when I heard another big bang upstairs. This time I realized that the room above the kitchen was empty at that time. The house was designed for 5 residents, but at that time there were only 4, and the room upstairs was empty. I went to check, but the room was empty. I stayed there for a while, and as far as I could see, everyone was sleeping. Due to their conditions, each resident had an alarm on their door that was triggered at night when someone left their room. A small receiver box would sound an alarm. The night staff carried the box with them, and it made a small noise to indicate which door had been opened. Since the alarm had not been triggered, I knew that the noise had not been caused by any of the residents. I returned to my cleaning work and didn't hear anything for the rest of the night. When I came to work the next day shortly before 10 a.m., I noticed that something was wrong. Marcos was lying at the foot of the stairs, holding his ears and humming loudly, and 2 employees were with him. After a few minutes, he was taken to the living room, and the house manager gave me an overview of what had happened in the last 4 hours. Marcos was very agitated, and kept repeating the sentence "S a small girl" when asked what was wrong. This was something that we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a film that had gotten stuck in his head and caused him to repeat the sentence. After Marcos had calmed down and lay down on the bed, the night staff left the station, and the other employees went to the staff room. I continued my shift and finished as usual around 1 a.m. Shortly thereafter, I went upstairs to check on the other residents. When I reached the first floor, I noticed that the lights had been turned off. There were two small hallways leading to the rooms on both sides of the stairs. Marcos's room was on the left, and the light switch was right in front of his room. I turned the corner to flip the switch, and there was Marcos standing in the dark and in complete silence. He was standing in the corner with his eyes open as wide as possible. The night shift at the gas station was always quiet and uneventful, but that was what I liked. I was the only one working, and had the place to myself. I filled the shelves, wiped the floors, and waited for the occasional customer to come in. It was the perfect job for someone like me who enjoyed the solitude of the night. But this night was different. The weather was terrible. A heavy storm was sweeping through the area, and the power was out. I was alone in the gas station, trapped after dark. I tried to keep busy, but the silence was deafening. All I could hear was the muffled sound of the heavy rain. As the storm continued to rage, I began to hear strange noises from outside. I tried to ignore them, but they got louder and closer. I could hear something scratching at the door and knew I had to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly walked to the door. As I opened it, a gust of wind rushed in and soaked me in the rain. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could hear someone breathing heavily. I stood frozen, not knowing what to do, and then out of nowhere a figure burst into the store. I stumbled back and fell to the ground. I was sure I was going to die, but as the figure got closer, I managed to catch a glimpse of it. All I could see was a dark silhouette, but it was a man. A giant of a man. He must have been at least 6'9" tall, with wild hair and a thick beard. He was wearing a large coat, but even without it he would have been huge. I crawled behind the counter and activated the alarm. But I knew that help was minutes away, and I didn't have a minute. I searched the store for the guy, but lost sight of him. However, I could hear him, and the sound of his movements sounded close. I knew I had to find a weapon, something to defend myself. I found a baseball bat and swung it in front of me. The man laughed amusedly and lunged at me again. I swung with all my might and hit him, making a dull and sickening sound. He let out a final scream and fell motionless to the ground. I couldn't tell where I had hit him, but I didn't want to stay and find out. I ran out of that place and down the road. In less than a minute I was drenched in the rain. Suddenly I noticed the red and blue flashing lights that I had been waiting for. It seemed like an eternity had passed since I had called, but looking back I know it was probably less than 5 minutes. I went back to the store to meet the police. When I arrived, my attacker was gone. I gave the police the surveillance footage, but since there was still no power, we couldn't see it at that time. However, the police were never able to find the guy. I was lucky to get away with my life, but I know that I will never be the same again. The memory of that night will haunt me forever, and I will always be looking over my shoulder, wondering when the man will come back. I quit my job at the gas station and never returned. I have been a security guard for over a decade. And in that time I have seen strange things, but nothing could have prepared me for the night when this story happened. It was 2018, and I was working the night shift at a hotel in the city center. The work was really good at that time. I was very into science fiction books and had a lot of time to read. There was a security office at the back of the building where I spent most of my time. Apart from that, I made a few rounds through the building and the parking lots every few hours during the night. It was a typical quiet night at the hotel. I was making my rounds, checking doors and windows, when I heard a loud noise from the parking lot. At first, I thought it might be a car backfiring, but when the noise continued, I knew that something was wrong. It was 2:30 a.m., and the place was completely deserted. Every noise stood out like an alarm. So these loud bangs that I heard in the parking lot were very disturbing. I immediately called the police and then went to the source of the noise. As I approached the parking lot, I saw a hooded figure trying to break into a car. My heart was beating fast as I shone my flashlight on him and told him to stop. As soon as I said those words, he ran away. I chased him, panting, as I tried to keep up the pace. I just needed to hold him long enough until the police arrived. He was fast, and I was starting to lose ground when he suddenly disappeared. I stopped and pointed my flashlight in all directions, but I saw no trace of him. Just when I thought I had lost him, I heard a soft noise coming from a nearby alley. My hand reached for my weapon, a pepper spray, as I cautiously approached. I saw him. The man was hiding behind a garbage container, trying to catch his breath. I ordered him to surrender, but he refused. He lunged at me wildly, and then jumped on me. Suddenly we were rolling over the ground, fighting. I cursed myself for following this man. I should have waited for the police, I thought. The man was strong, but I managed to overpower him and hold him until the officers arrived. He turned out to be a wanted criminal with a long history of violence and theft. Some years have passed, but I still think about that night. The feeling of fear, adrenaline, and physical combat with the criminal will always be a part of me. I am grateful for the training that I received, and I know that it helped me to handle the situation as well as possible. But I also know that being a security guard means more than just making patrols and checking doors. It's about being prepared for anything, and being able to handle dangerous situations however rare they may be. When I was 20 years old, I worked at a gas station on the other side of the city where I lived. I had recently graduated from high school and took the night shift as a way to earn extra money since my main job didn't pay much. The gas station was open all night, but my shift was from 7 p.m. to midnight, which worked well since my other job ended at 5. It sounds like a tough schedule, and it was, but if I'm being honest, the work was really easy. It got even better because I got along very well with all my coworkers. The store itself was never very busy, since most people paid at the pump anyway. The night usually consisted of switching between scrolling through Instagram and joking with my coworkers, occasionally interrupted by a customer asking where the toilet was. The night shifts always had 2 workers, not because it was busy, but for safety reasons. It's always better to have someone nearby to watch your back, and my colleagues and I took this responsibility very seriously. This event took place on a Thursday evening, around 11 p.m. It was me and another guy, Alan, who was younger than me. I think he was 18 years old and still in high school. He had short red hair and a soft face. I don't think he even had to shave. He had worked there longer than I had, and there was a kind of older brother-younger brother dynamic between us. He was always asking me how to do everything, even though I was pretty sure he was smart enough to figure it out himself. It was mid-August, and although it was late at night, it was incredibly hot in the store. We often left the back door to the yard open, so that a breath of fresh air came in every time someone entered the front door. That was always a welcome relief from the summer heat. However, we were having a great time making jokes when the store was empty at night. I was just tidying up one of the shelves when I noticed 2 cars stopping in front of the store. One was a sedan with some noticeable dents on the body, and the other was a white van with tinted windows. The van drove to one of the gas pumps, and the car parked in one of the front spaces. I quickly finished what I was doing, and returned to the counter in case one of them needed to pay. At this point I wasn't sure if the 2 were together. I assumed that they probably were because very few customers came in at that time, and it was unusual for 2 vehicles to arrive at the same time. I waited a few minutes, and finally a single man entered the store. He was small, probably around 30, and thin as a stick. He was wearing a sleeveless white t-shirt and loosely fitting jeans that seemed to be at least a few sizes too big. He stared at me with a blank look as he came towards me. I saw him reach behind his back, and before I realized it, I saw the barrel of a gun. The gas station had a silent alarm that could be discreetly triggered, but it was a few steps away, and I couldn't afford to move. Alan was in the back, and I knew that he could hear whatever was happening in the store. So I said loudly, "No sir, please don't shoot. Take whatever you want." That should be enough for Alan to call the police. As I said that, the man rolled his eyes and smiled. Then he looked to the side. I turned around to look in the same direction, and saw Alan unconscious while he was being carried out of the back by a second man. He must have come in through the open back door. Then they demanded the money. I quickly opened the cash register and emptied it into a bag, then handed it to one of them. Then I filled another bag with all the lottery tickets and handed them over as well. The man holding Alan then told me that they would release him if I didn't call the police. After that, both men left through the front door, with one still carrying Alan, and both cars drove away. I stood there, and it felt like hours had passed, but it was probably only a few minutes. I hesitated to call the police because of what the man had said, but soon I decided that I had to call them, so I dialed 911 and reported the incident. The police arrived within minutes and checked the surveillance footage. I waited as patiently as I could under the circumstances. Not much later, one of the officers told me that they were able to recognize the license plate of one of the cars. They weren't the smartest criminals, I suppose. Later that night, I learned that both men had been caught by the police, and they took me to the station to identify them. An enormous feeling of relief washed over my whole body when I saw both guys standing in a line. I quickly chose the two men who weren't smart enough to hide their faces. After that, I asked one of the officers where Alan was. He looked at me with a serious expression, put his right hand on my shoulder, and then told me that they had never found Alan. I used to work every Thursday and Friday afternoon. Every week my shifts went from 6 p.m. to midnight. Although the schedule got in the way of my studies, my parents allowed it because they thought it would be good for me to get some work experience. After a couple of weeks of work, I would be alone for the last 2 hours of my shift. There was another guy who was there until 10 p.m., which was fine with me because it was usually very quiet at that time. I was standing behind the counter looking at my phone at around 11 p.m. one evening. Suddenly the door opened, and a man came in. He was tall, probably 6'3" inches, with a long dirty coat and sunglasses. He was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and also had a long beard, so I couldn't see much of his face. My first thought was that he was going to rob the store because it looked like he had made an effort to conceal his appearance. The guy slowly walked through the aisles and then stopped at the back of the store next to the coffee machine. He just stood there. He didn't buy anything and never said a word, not even looking at me. 5 minutes before closing time, he just walked back out the front door through which he had come. I was relieved when he left, but of course he scared me. Why would someone stay in a store for an hour without buying anything? I guess that technically it wasn't against any of our rules, but it was incredibly scary for me, especially since I was alone. On my next shift, I asked my colleague if he had seen anything similar since he had more experience than I did. I thought he might have seen the guy before. My colleague told me that he had never seen anyone like him. That evening when I was alone again, the same strange guy came back in and did the same thing. He came through the front door at 10:30 p.m. and then stood silently. During that time several people came in, but I guess it didn't seem that strange to them since they were only there for a minute or two. Like last time, he left a few minutes before closing time without any incidents. On my next shifts, the same situation happened again and again. I started to expect it sometimes. I tried to talk to the guy, but he never responded. He didn't even look at me. One of the evenings, the strange guy was standing on the other side of the store as usual. I can't describe how uncomfortable it was to be alone with this guy night after night. We had probably spent more than 10 hours together since I had started working. As usual, he left a few minutes before closing time. After he had gone, I went to the front door and locked it. Then I spent the next 30 minutes doing my closing routine. I emptied the trash cans and did a quick mop clean. Then I emptied the cash register and prepared it for deposit. On my way home, as I stepped out of the store, I looked outside and saw my car standing alone in the dark parking lot. It was on the opposite side beyond the gas pumps. I started walking to my car and suddenly I had the feeling of being watched. Just as that happened, someone came out of the darkness and stood in front of me, blocking my car. It was the same guy as before, the one who just stayed there in the store with me every night. As soon as I saw him, I ran back to the store and locked the door and hurried inside. Once inside, I locked the door and called my dad for help. While I was waiting, I looked out of the big glass window in the front and could see the guy still standing in the same spot where I had last seen him. He hadn't moved. After about 10 minutes, my dad's car pulled up and his headlights illuminated the guy. The guy's face was completely illuminated for a moment, and as that happened, he ran away. To this day, I have no idea where he went. That was the last time that I worked at that gas station, and since then I have refused to take night shifts at my other jobs. The people you meet are just too scary. I have no idea who that guy was or what he wanted, but in my opinion he wasn't in his right mind, and I don't know what he was capable of. This story occurred one evening when I stopped to get gas on my way home from work. I was working at a restaurant, so I was normally there until late, sometimes even after midnight. This time, it was around 11 p.m. I drove past this gas station every day on the way home from work, and I'm pretty sure that it was open 24/7. The store area of the gas station was larger than most. It was almost like a small grocery store because it had a decent selection of groceries, not just junk food and snacks like others. This place even had a small aisle with fresh produce, which is why I often picked up some things after filling my car with gas, since other places in the area were normally closed at this time. I walked through the aisles of the store with my car parked outside. I filled my basket with some essential things that I always buy: bananas, eggs, and bread. Then I strolled around for a while, deciding if I wanted anything else. Eventually, I came to the cashier and paid for both my gas and the items in the store. Then I walked outside through the large glass door on the front of the store. I could see that my car was parked next to one of the gas pumps. The parking lot was dark, but the bright lights from the gas pumps were like a glowing oasis. I began walking to my car, and as I got closer, I saw that someone was sitting in the back seat. Normally, I don't lock the doors when I get in because it's normally pretty quick, but this time I was in there longer than usual. Plus, my car is pretty old, so you have to close them all manually. I know that's not smart, but those are my excuses, so take them how you will. I approached slowly to get a look at the person. It appeared to be an older woman who was covered in hair over most of her face, and the shadow from the car roof was forming a dark corner in the back seat where she was sitting, so it was hard to say much about her. My initial impression was that it was an elderly woman who had confusedly sat down in my car. I stood a few meters from the car while I thought about the situation. I considered just giving her a ride to wherever she was going. I'm always willing to help people in need, but something in me thought that that wasn't a good idea. After a minute or two, I decided to call the police. I hated involving the police in something like this, and made sure that they knew that it wasn't an emergency or anything. Also, I didn't want to press any charges. When the police arrived, I spoke to the officers for a few minutes. After that, they asked me to wait next to the building to give them some space. I couldn't see much from there, and the bodies of the two officers were blocking what little view I would have had. I could see them open the rear car door, and before I realized, they pulled the person out of the back seat and handcuffed him. I thought that was unnecessary, so I ran over and shouted at them to stop. In my mind, it was just a confused elderly woman who had accidentally gotten into my car. But as I got closer, I noticed that it wasn't a woman at all. It was an older man, probably 50 or 60 years old, with long gray hair and several large tattoos on his face and hands. For some reason, he was wearing a hospital gown over his clothes. I stopped abruptly when I noticed that, and one of the officers shouted at me to stop where I was. I took a few steps back and continued to watch in disbelief. My heart sank as I noticed something. As they were searching the man, I saw them pull out a large hunting knife from underneath his clothes. He definitely had something planned for me, something that I didn't want to be a part of. It's very scary to think that I almost got into the car with that guy in the back. Luckily, I made the right decision and survived. This happened a little more than a month ago. I was with a couple of other guys at my friend Inyaki's house. There were 5 or 6 of us in total. I lived pretty far away, but everyone else lived in his neighborhood. I took my dad's car to get there. My friends had a few drinks, but I had to drive, so I couldn't drink anything. Around midnight we decided to call it a night, and I got in the car to say goodbye to my friends. My dad always lends me his car, but he requires me to fill it up to compensate for the consumption. That's a fair rule. I drove along one of the largest streets in my city. There were shops and restaurants on both sides, but everything was closed for the night and the street was pretty deserted. I noticed a gas station on the right and thought it was a good place to fill up. I parked at the furthest pump, and as I was filling up, I saw another car at the gas station. It was the only other car besides mine. It was dark blue and had tinted windows. I didn't see anyone in it, but the headlights were on, so I assumed someone was there. As I got back into the driver's seat, I saw the car pull up to the pump next to mine. The front window was rolled down and the driver was wearing a mask so that I couldn't see his face. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. The situation was really uncomfortable. I tried to start my car and get out of there, but I was having trouble with the ignition. I looked up and saw that the car was still there waiting for me. Finally, I managed to start the car and drive off. After a few minutes, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that the car was still behind me. My first thought was to drive to the police station. That's what my mother had always told me to do in that kind of situation. I thought I still knew how to get there, but after a while I had gotten lost and the car was still following me. I felt like I was going in circles and getting lost in the middle of nowhere. I tried to stay calm, but the anxiety was overwhelming. I had reached a very rural area with agricultural fields on both sides and tall corn plants towering over the road. I felt trapped and I was all alone with this guy behind me. I slowed down and called the emergency number. The dispatcher answered and I tried to describe where I was, but all I could see was darkness. I couldn't see any landmarks or anything. The operator was trying to help me, but I could feel the frustration in his voice. I knew that I was in trouble. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated a large grain silo with the name Miller painted on the side. I excitedly told the operator about it, and he seemed to think that that would be enough for the police to find me. I drove for a few more minutes. At that moment, I saw a flash of light in the distance. It was a police car. I honked the horn so that they would see me. The police car got closer and the other car drove away. I was really relieved when I noticed that the police officer was getting out of his car and asking me if I was okay. I told him everything and we talked for a few minutes. He asked me if I wanted to file a report, but I declined. I just wanted to go home and forget everything. Besides, the car was already gone. I didn't know if they would find it, and if they found it, I would probably just say that nothing had happened. When I finally got home, I collapsed on the couch and tried to calm down. My heart was still pounding and I felt like I was in a trance-like state. I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep that night, so I turned on the TV and tried to distract myself. Then I went to my room and played video games. Finally, I fell asleep as the sun was rising. Weeks later, I saw a report on the news about a man who had been assaulted and robbed at a gas station. The description of the car and the driver matched the car that had followed me, and I'm pretty sure that it was the same one. It was a cold winter evening, and I was working at the gas station in my village. The gas station was small with a few gas pumps, a small shop and a toilet. I spent most of my time in the shop serving customers and trying to keep warm. As night fell, the gas station became quieter. Occasionally a car would stop to fill up or buy a snack, but mostly I was alone, completely alone. It was only when two men came in that everything changed. One was tall and thin with pale skin and high cheekbones. The other was of average height with long gray hair and a baseball cap. Both were wearing dirty jackets and trousers, and their hair was unkempt. I tried to be polite, but was wary of them. They asked me for directions to the nearest village, and I pointed them in the right direction, thinking they would leave soon, but they kept staring at me up and down, and asking me personal questions. I tried to answer briefly, but they didn't get the hint. Eventually they bought some cigarettes and left, getting into an old worn-out car that was parked outside. I sighed with relief when they were gone, but I didn't know that my problems were far from over. After my shift ended, I went outside to wait for the bus. The night air was chilly and my breath condensed in front of me. Suddenly, the same old car with the two men at the wheel pulled up next to me. They offered me a ride, but I refused, telling them that I preferred to wait for the bus. But they kept pushing and started to make me really uncomfortable. Then I noticed a look in their eyes that gave me goosebumps. I told them that I wasn't interested, and then moved away as quickly as possible. When I was a street away, I looked around and saw that the car was still there. I also saw that the bus was quickly approaching. I ran to the nearest stop and managed to get on just in time. I knew that something wasn't right with these guys. I thought about calling the police, but decided against it to avoid causing a commotion. In the following weeks, I noticed this car circling around the gas station. They just seemed to be driving around the neighborhood, and I had no idea what they were up to. I try not to go out alone when those guys are around, and so far that seems to be working out the best. This happened not too long ago. I was on my way home from visiting relatives out of state. It was late, and I was tired, but I had to keep driving. The road lay before me like a black ribbon, and the only sound was the hum of my car's engine. I could never listen to music while I was driving. It distracted me too much. I was deep in thought when I saw a gas station up ahead. I decided to stop and buy some coffee and snacks to keep me awake. As I got out of the car, I felt a chill in the air. The gas station was small and isolated, with a blinking neon sign that read, "Open 24 hours." I entered the store and was immediately hit by the smell of gasoline and cigarettes. The store was dimly lit with only a few humming neon lights up above. A man stood behind the counter with greasy hair and a stained t-shirt. He looked up as I came in and his eyes seemed to follow me as I walked to the coffee machine. I poured myself a cup and then grabbed a bag of chips and some jerky. As I turned around to leave, the man was standing in front of me, blocking my path. "Nice car you got there," he said, looking at me leeringly. "Must have cost you a fortune." A cold sweat broke out on me. This guy was creepy and I didn't want to stay to find out what he wanted. "Yeah, it's a rental," I lied, trying to get past him, but he didn't move. He was looking at me with a hungry look in his eyes like a predator sizing up its prey. "You know I could help you," he said, stepping closer. "I know a shortcut that'll get you home faster." This guy was really scaring me at this point. Something about him disgusted me. I hadn't even told him where I was going, so how could he know if there was a shortcut? "Sorry, I'm not interested," I said, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me towards him. I could smell the stench of his breath and felt nausea rising in my throat. "Come on, man," he hissed. "Don't be like that. Let me help you." I wrenched myself free from his grip and stepped back. I could hear him laughing behind me as I ran out of the store and jumped into my car. I sped out of that parking lot and back onto the road with squealing tires. I was almost crying, but as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the man from the gas station come out and get into his own car. He was following me. I tried to shake him off by taking sharp turns and weaving through traffic, but he was right behind me with his lights glowing in my mirror like the eyes of a demon. Suddenly he sped up and started tailgating me, trying to force me off the road. I could feel my car losing control and I braced myself for the impact, but somehow I managed to regain control and pull away from him. I didn't stop until I reached a small motel on the outskirts of town. I stumbled into the lobby and begged for a room. I was pretty sure I had lost him. The receptionist looked at me with suspicious eyes but eventually gave me a key and pointed me to my room. I stepped inside and collapsed on the bed. I don't remember how long I lay there staring at the ceiling before I finally fell asleep, but it was a long time. When I woke up at 6 a.m., I felt even more exhausted. I stuck my head out of the room and scanned the area for that car. It wasn't there. I breathed a sigh of relief and returned to my car to drive the rest of the way home. I never saw that car again and I never told anyone what happened until now, and I probably never will again. I worked at a gas station until my late 20s, and this is the scariest thing that happened to me there. I got the job when I was still in high school, and stuck with it because I couldn't find much else. Nights were a little better, so I always took that shift. I had worked there for years, serving customers without any significant events or disruptions. It was around 3 a.m. and the store was empty, as was typical at that time. During my shift, there was rarely more than one customer in the store at a time. It was a cold night and it was raining lightly. I looked up and saw a man approaching the door, his face obscured by a hoodie. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. He looked suspicious, and I got nervous as he came into the store. "Hey Kay," he said, glancing at me briefly. I took a quick look at his face, but not enough to describe it. I tried to stay calm and just nodded silently, and continued reading, but something about him worried me, and I couldn't help but feel that something was going to go wrong. He walked aimlessly around the store for several minutes. I watched him occasionally, nervously, that he would try something. I could see that he wasn't going to buy anything. Our store didn't have a good selection, and there was no reason why someone would take so long to make a decision. The tension continued to build for another minute or two. Then the man came to the counter. "Give me all the money from the cash register," he whispered. I was shocked and couldn't comprehend what was happening. I had never been robbed before, and the thought of someone threatening me with violence was beyond my worst nightmares. "Okay, no problem," I said shyly. I opened the cash register and gave him the money, and then as quickly as he had come in, he disappeared into the night like a ghost. I stood there frozen. I had triggered the alarm while he was still in the store, so I knew that it wouldn't be long before the police arrived. They came through the front door of the store and I was still standing there, completely terrified. I told them what had happened, and then we checked the surveillance footage. It was all there, but there wasn't a clear picture of his face. The officers were sure that they would find the guy based on what they had. The next day I learned that they had found and arrested the guy. He was still wearing the same clothes. He wasn't the smartest. I worked in a fast food restaurant, in a large shopping mall. It was open until midnight most of the time, and the last place that was open in the area. When my late shifts ended, there was always a really ominous mood in the air. The empty parking lot sent shivers down my spine. I worked there part-time while I was in college. On one particular evening, I was closing the restaurant with some other colleagues. To give some context, we were all girls, and there were 3 of us, including my manager. We turned off the outside lights and began cleaning the kitchen and the dining area. As we were just about to leave, the phone in the restaurant rang. It was an eerie sound because we had just turned off all the lights. The only source of light was a faint glow coming from the kitchen. My manager answered the call, and we all stood around her trying to hear the conversation. We heard the choppy voice of a man on the other end of the line. He said, "I see you in there," among other things, but the only thing that I could understand was "I saw." I looked at my colleagues. We were all visibly scared, but we tried to stay calm in the hope that it was just a prank call. Sometimes we got prank calls, but it wasn't common for them to come so late. It was already time for most people who usually pranked us to go to bed. My manager tried to ask the man who he was and what he wanted, but he didn't answer. When my manager hung up the phone, we heard a loud bang on the front door. We all flinched. My manager quickly ran to the front to check what was going on. I looked out of the large window and followed her. There stood a man in a flannel shirt in front of the door with his back to us. We couldn't see his face, but he looked neat and well-groomed, not like you would expect. His hair was thinning on top and he had his hands in his pockets. My manager made sure that the door was locked and told us to call the police. I dialed 911, and within minutes a police car arrived. We could see the red and blue lights in the dining area where we were waiting. While we were looking out the window, we could see the police officer walk up to the man and start talking to him. The man turned around and we could see his face for the first time. He had a serious expression and was looking directly at me. The police officer spoke to the man for a few minutes. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but it seemed like the police officer was telling him to leave. The man just walked away. Then the police officer went into the restaurant to talk to us. He asked us if we knew the man or had seen him before. We all shook our heads and said that we had no idea who he was. That's when the police officer told us something really creepy. He told me that the man had said he was Sophie's father and he was here to pick her up after work. I told him that that wasn't my father, and that I had never seen the man before. I had no idea how he even knew my name. It must have been a sick joke, I thought. After the police had left, we closed the restaurant and left. We were all really shaken up and couldn't stop talking about what had just happened. The next day, we talked to the other employees who had worked the previous late shift and none of them had seen the man or heard anything strange. It was as if the man had only appeared for us. In the following weeks, we were all nervous when we were closing up. We always made sure that we checked all the locks twice and always looked outside before we left. We never saw that man again. When I think back to that night, I still get chills when I think about what would have happened if we had gone outside. I still wonder what he wanted and why he had said what he had said to the officers. I was disappointed that more wasn't done to keep him away. It made me feel uneasy for a long time, and I wished something could have been done to keep him away. I used to work as a cleaner in a local shopping center. I worked at night when the shops were all closed and the customers had gone home. It was a quiet job. Mostly I was alone, and sometimes there were a few others there. This time it was just me. I always listened to music or podcasts on my phone while I worked. Otherwise, the boredom would have been too much. One night I was mopping the floor of a narrow hallway that led to the bathroom. There was a nearby exit and a large glass door. I heard a knock behind me. I turned around and saw a man in a police uniform standing outside the glass door. He was looking directly at me and then said, "Let me in, it's an emergency." I hesitated for a moment. I was surprised to see anyone else here. It was 1:30 in the morning and I knew that there wouldn't be any police officers in the shopping center at that time, especially not knocking on a glass door to get in. But something about the man's urgent tone made me feel that I should at least listen. "Why do you need to get in?" I asked, my hand on the lock. "There was a break-in at the jewelry store. I need to get in and secure the scene," he replied. The jeweler's was one of the most valuable shops in the shopping center. Sure, they had a lot of expensive things, but if someone had broken in, I think I would have noticed. I had my headphones in, but it's hard to believe that I wouldn't have noticed. And I was pretty sure that the jeweler's locked all its expensive stuff away overnight. I didn't believe his story. Something wasn't right about the man's behavior. He was too friendly and eager for someone who was supposedly responding to a break-in, and there was only one officer. Normally there would be at least a couple. I didn't even see the guy's car. "I'm sorry, I can't let you in," I said, decidedly, and then reached for my phone to call the police. The man's smile disappeared, replaced by a frown. He began to hammer on the glass door, demanding that I let him in, but I knew better than to open the door to a stranger in the middle of the night. While I was talking to the police dispatcher, the man finally gave up and disappeared from my sight. I told them what had happened, describing the man and his police uniform as best as I could. They assured me that they would send someone to check it out, and then I went to the main entrance to wait. It only took a few minutes for 2 police cars to arrive. One of the officers got out of his car, and as soon as I saw him, I noticed that their uniform didn't match the guys that I had seen before. At that moment, I knew that I had made the right decision in refusing him. I spoke to the police for a few minutes, but they told me that there was no report of a break-in in the shopping center, further confirmation of what I already knew. The rest of the night passed without incident. I finished my shift as usual and left the shopping center at 6 a.m. While I was driving home, I thought about what that guy might have wanted. I guess he just wanted to rob the store, but what would he have done to me? It wouldn't have been good. In high school, there was a boy named Heinrich, which was an unusual name in my town. Practically everyone kept their distance from him, except for his 2 friends, who were equally unpleasant. In my junior year of high school, I had the misfortune of sitting right next to him in one of my classes. I immediately planned to ask the teacher for a seat change at the end of the hour on the first day. Before I had the chance, Heinrich was already bothering me. He kept asking where I got my bag, my shoes and my shirt, whether my hair color was natural or dyed, and all this coming from someone whose butt you could smell from 10 feet away. I endured the first hour of class and stayed behind to talk to the teacher, but she completely ignored me. She was one of those teachers who never had expectations for anyone or anything. Some older students had warned me about her before. I thought she would overlook letting a girl sit next to this creep for the entire school year, but no. It only took a few days for Heinrich to develop a crush on me. To make matters worse, I still walked to and from school. Heinrich found out about this and took the opportunity to accompany me home one day, or as he put it, to escort me home to make sure I was safe, as if I hadn't been able to protect myself for the past 2 years. My home was a 15-minute walk from school. Normally, it was a perfect time and led through a good area, a moment to relax between responsibilities and clear my head. Heinrich turned this into eternal hell. We were within sight so that everyone at school could see us. Most people knew what was going on, but some really thought that I wanted to spend time with him. When I found out that I had to sit next to him permanently, I tried to be as nice as possible, which wasn't very nice, but even that was too much. It was too late to be rude because I had also tried that, and it didn't work. He found a way to praise everything I said and did, constantly comparing us and arguing that we were somehow very similar. He was obsessed with the idea that we could be together and be like Bonnie and Clyde, but our names weren't even similar to theirs. The worst part about him walking with me was the fact that he knew where I lived. It's no surprise that he tried to invite himself in, but I set a clear boundary there and almost spat in his face. The only reason I didn't is because he probably would have liked it. I tried to talk to my counselor about whether I could change classes, but that was also useless. He said things like Heinrich hadn't done anything wrong, which was practically useless to me. At the beginning of September, we had a 3-day weekend for Labor Day. I was looking forward to being away from Heinrich for 1 day longer, but I was fully aware that he was responsible for me not being able to connect with my school friends who didn't have plans for the weekend. I was so depressed that I just wanted to go to bed. I only had one thing planned, a baby shower on Saturday for a relative I barely knew. The night before, I slept terribly. I was overwhelmed by anxiety, seemingly for no reason, and every time I started to fall asleep, I fell directly into a nightmare about Heinrich. At some point, I even woke up believing I saw his face in the window. It almost stopped my heart, but when I blinked, it disappeared. Just to be sure, I got up and looked outside, but there was no sign of him in the backyard. I closed my blinds and even pulled the sheer curtains that I never use. I couldn't sleep at all anymore. I really couldn't decide if what I had seen was real, or just a visual disturbance. Sometimes when I wake up, I see a crystal clear vision of a giant spider coming towards me, but when I blink, it disappears before my body becomes awake enough to move. In the morning, I asked my parents to pay special attention to making sure we locked the house well before we went to the baby shower. I told them about the situation with Heinrich and how he had been following me everywhere. Fortunately, they at least cared about me. My father assured me that he would lock the house well, and my mother went even further by reminding me that I was good at using a stun gun. Then she gave me the small pepper spray bottle from her keychain. That made me feel a little better, but I was still on edge all day. My relatives kept asking me if everything was okay, and all I could say was yes. We didn't get home until 8 p.m. I grabbed a snack in the kitchen, and while I was there, I made sure the back door was still locked. After that, I went straight to my room and watched YouTube videos on my laptop until I fell asleep. Minutes later, I woke up but couldn't move. I couldn't breathe either. I was trapped in a sleep paralysis. The closest thing I had ever had to a sleep paralysis demon was the spider I mentioned before, but there was no sign of a spider. I kept trying to force myself to breathe, but it was as if I had forgotten how to do it. I tried to relax instead, and looked around my room, but I became nervous because it was darker than usual, because of the curtains, of course. I could clearly see Heinrich's face looking over the edge of my bed. My heart almost jumped out of my chest, but I still couldn't move. I continued to stare at his face, hoping it would disappear, and praying it was a hallucination. But when I blinked, he didn't disappear. He moved. Heinrich slowly stood up and came towards me. "Let's have a pajama party," he whispered, as he approached my mouth with a strip of tape. At the last second, I managed to free myself from the grip of sleep paralysis, and screamed as I grabbed the pillow that was next to me, and pressed it into his face. Blindly, he stuck the piece of tape on my mouth, but since he couldn't see what was happening, I quickly reached under the pillow I had been sleeping on, and grabbed the pepper spray that my mother had given me, and triggered the mechanism as she had explained it to me. Then I pointed it directly at his face, just as he ripped the pillow away. I sprayed the spray, and hit him as well as I could, but some of it hit me too. We were paralyzed, but luckily only another 15 seconds passed before my parents rushed into my room. At that point, they performed a citizen's arrest until the police arrived. The police officers checked the house and found damage to the outside of the back door lock, indicating that Heinrich had broken the lock. It really doesn't surprise me that picking locks is something he's good at. Heinrich was sent to juvenile detention for a few weeks, and then through a tedious bureaucratic process, I managed to get him expelled from school. Once, I was in a relationship with the craziest girl I've ever met. I was pretty desperate for love when I thought I had fallen for her. Man, she might have been the most attractive girl I'll ever be with, but it wasn't worth it. I realized that she was extremely detrimental to me. She spent all my money, drove all my friends away, and as soon as she had me to herself, she took away all my free time and drained my life force. I'm not even going into the smallest details about all the little things that made her madness, her own special kind of madness. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and ended it in the most human way possible. I did it in person, in a private place, in my car right in front of her apartment. She cried, screamed, slapped me in the face, threw a few things, and made a big mess in my car. But no matter what she said, I told her that there was no chance that I would ever be with her again. She walked away angrily, with the last thing she told me before slamming the car door being that I would regret treating her badly. Actually, I regret even agreeing to sleep with her. As soon as I was gone, I felt a wave of relief, as if I had freed myself from an evil witch's spell. I spent the rest of the day doing all the things I could never do when she was around. Then I called my friends and went to the bar with them for the first time in a month. I told them how everything happened, and they warned me about something, just like they had warned me about the dangers of crazy girls the first time I was with her. "That's not over," they said. "You may have broken up with her, but she hasn't broken up with you yet." They couldn't have been more right. That same night, as my friends and I were leaving the bar, I went to my car and noticed something in the gap between the hood and the windshield. I looked closer and pulled out a rusty and twisted steel nail, 6 inches long. I keep my car very clean, so I was pretty sure it hadn't been there in the morning. I don't know anything about witchcraft or magic and don't believe in such things, but my ex-girlfriend was a proud self-proclaimed witch, so I suspected that she had something to do with it. I asked one of my friends to ask his girlfriend about it, and she confirmed what I thought, explaining that my ex probably used it for some kind of curse, and then left it there to make sure it caused the damage it was supposed to cause. But I thought that was nonsense. Still, I worried about what the woman might do. After I found out that it was definitely from my ex, I threw it in the trash. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning. The next week was a nightmare. Many parts of it are probably familiar to many. One morning, I woke up and saw a bunch of key marks on my car. Apparently they were runes. The next day, 3 of my tires were flat. 24 hours later, there were a bunch of broken pieces of glass and rusty nails at my door, surrounded by a dark stain on the concrete. My friend's girlfriend said that it was probably a war water vial. I don't know what that means, and I didn't really care. At some point I even started seeing her out of the corner of my eye, just flashes. When I really turned around to look at her, she was already around the corner, or behind something and too far away for me to do anything about it. I was just as annoyed as I was scared. I didn't know what she was capable of, but her intentions were clearly not good. Days after our breakup, there was a psychotic letter on my door, impaled with, you guessed it, a long rusty and twisted steel nail of Zoll length. Basically, it said that if I didn't want to suffer the worst torments in this life, and then even more in the afterlife, I should immediately go to her apartment, crawl to her feet, beg for forgiveness, and swear that I would serve her perfectly. Really crazy stuff. Of course, I didn't do anything. I had work the next day. I had stopped turning my life around this immature idiot. I had just picked up my car from the shop after getting new tires, and since she had already attacked my car before, I thought that she would do something else. I was right, but that wasn't all. When I returned to my car at the end of my shift, my heart sank. I could see it from 100 feet away. A far damned rusty and twisted steel nail, 6 inches long, but this time she had stuck it through my windshield, causing it to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Fortunately, the composite film held everything together, but it was completely impossible to see through it. I pulled out my phone and sat in my car to call another tow truck, but the moment I closed the door, I smelled it, my ex's perfume, and it was strong. A shiver ran down my spine at that moment. Instinctively, I knew that she was right behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw her crawling out of the bottom of the back seat, the look of pure evil in her face, smiling, hugging me from behind in a strange kind of back embrace. And then I realized that she was holding one of those rusty and twisted steel nails, 6 inches long, in her hands, pointed at my heart, and through the glint at the tip, it was clearly sharp. She was ready to stab it into my heart. I laughed. "You're not strong enough to stick that through my breastbone with that," I said. "Shut up," she screamed. "I'm strong enough to stick it through your windshield, aren't I? Wasn't that what I did? And what if I stick it into one of your ribs? Or why don't I stick it into your throat? How about that? Smarter." She brought the tip of the nail to my carotid artery, though I didn't care at all at the moment. Suddenly, I was overcome with anger. My patience was exhausted. All I saw was red. I grabbed my keys and started my car. "What are you doing?" my ex screamed. "Don't go anywhere, or I'll stick this in." She started the nail into my flesh and let me bleed, but I hardly felt it. I shifted into first gear and slammed on the gas pedal. The nail cut at the side of my neck, as my ex flew backwards into the seat. She began to scream like crazy and try to regain her balance to be able to come at me, but I was already in second gear, racing through the parking lot lanes, struggling to see through the broken windshield. As I was just about to climb over the center console, I slammed hard on the brakes. Suddenly, I noticed how much pain was in my neck, but finally she got what she deserved, and crashed against the windshield. The film still didn't give way, and held her in like a nut holding her in. I pulled the handbrake, got out, and then pulled the screaming crazy out of my car, and threw her onto the asphalt. I got back into my car, and locked the doors. Then I called the police. When they came, my ex was banging on the door and trying to break her way into my car. "Look what you've done to me," she screamed, pointing to her face. There was a deep wound on the right side of her face, from above her right eyebrow to the corner of her mouth. When the police arrived, I was arrested, and she was taken to the hospital. She filed charges, and we almost went to trial, but at the last minute the case was dismissed, due to my lawyers bringing the harassment she had been committing before the judge. Ultimately, my actions were deemed self-defense. Things aren't over for me. Unfortunately, she has found a new way to ruin my life. Now I'm being sued in a civil trial, but I believe my counterclaim will prevail in the end. This just shows that you should make impulsive decisions, don't meet crazy people, and I assume even if a sharp object is pointed at your throat, you should defend yourself as gently as possible. When I was in college and living in the dorms, I spent most of my study time in the library or the Starbucks on campus. The library was free to enter and quieter, but the Starbucks was closer to most of my classes and had coffee. Plus, I could spend time with my friends there. It was a popular place for this reason, and also my preferred study spot. I never paid attention to what was going on around me, or who was sitting in the cafe. My ability to focus was pretty strong, especially with the help of caffeine and my medication for my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. My friends, however, were not like that. They were much more talkative and liked to people watch during their breaks. At the beginning of the second semester, a new person appeared in the cafe. If no one had told me about it, I would have assumed that he had been there all year like everyone else. But my friends knew that they had never seen this guy before. He seemed harmless at first, like anyone else, and was more of a potential new gossip topic than any kind of threat. When they called my attention to it, I just saw another guy with a latte working on his laptop, taking notes and listening to music. My friends asked me what I thought of him, if he was cute, or if I knew who he was. He was a little pale and a little greasy, with a weak chin, but generally he was unremarkable. "He's a stranger," I said, "and pretty ugly." Maybe I said that too loud, because the noise and laughter of my friends made him look at us for just a second. I looked away and continued to work. The next day he was back in the cafe doing exactly the same thing as the day before. He was writing things in his notebook, looking at his laptop and looking around. I didn't think anything of it, even when I saw him every day, as I spent the whole next week there. The only thing that seemed weird to me was the fact that I was paying attention. Sure, I saw the same 50 faces there every time, but I had never noticed his existence. What did this guy have that I was unconsciously paying attention to? No idea, but I had more important things to do again. Taking notes in classes, listening to lectures and reading textbooks. I had a class that week that was right next to the library, so naturally I did my studying there after class, instead of going to the Starbucks on the other side of campus. It was nice to have a break. The silence was always pleasant. No one spoke in the library. Everyone was in their own world, with their heads down and focused on their tasks, except for this guy. About 10 minutes into my study session, I saw him sitting about 10 tables away. I rolled my eyes and tried to ignore him, but he was still looking at me. Not just fleeting glances, but he was watching me for a few seconds, and then looking away as soon as he noticed that I saw him. At this point it seemed as if he might have a crush on me, but I was determined not to let any guy distract me from achieving my goals. After a few more days, however, he disappeared into the background. The novelty wore off and I didn't care if he was around or not. Unfortunately, as much as I tried to ignore him, the more often he showed up everywhere I went, even on my way back to my dorm after the class that ended at 8 p.m. I was just trying to get home after a long day of classes. I walked through the door of the building and no one was behind me, except for the other students in the class that had just ended, none of whom I knew had a pale, greasy face with a weak chin. But as soon as I went down the steps and onto the sidewalk, who did I see if not him? My stomach sank at that moment. I kept walking because I wanted to avoid the interaction. Eventually I was just standing there alone with him still following behind me. I walked down the hall to my dorm and went to the door that was on the first floor. I was afraid that this crazy would come in with his ID and follow me, but when I got to my room door I looked around. He was standing in front of the glass and staring at me. I quickly went into my room and closed the door behind me. Unfortunately, my roommate wasn't there to reassure me. The claustrophobia began to creep in, so I put on some music and tried to study before going to sleep, but I couldn't concentrate. It took me hours to finish what should have only taken an hour. Finally, at 11 p.m. I was done. I fell exhausted into bed. I didn't even move when my roommate came home. I had some weird nightmares, but I don't remember much about them. All I know is that I woke up in a cold sweat. When I got out of bed, I noticed something so concerning that it changed my way of life in many aspects. A piece of paper was stuck to my stomach because I had been sweating. When I got up, it fell to the floor. I picked it up and read it. There were only 6 words written on it. "You are a victim, an ugly one." My heart sank. My roommate asked what was wrong and I begged her to tell me if she had closed the door when she came back from the party she had gone to the night before, but she just shrugged her shoulders. When we checked, we found that she had left the door wide open when she came in, staggering. That could mean that the door was wide open for this stranger to break into our room, and for what? Just to scare me. Slowly things began to make sense, albeit in a twisted and sick way. I didn't want to understand what was happening, but I couldn't prevent it. I hadn't noticed that I had been getting stalked for the last month. This guy with the weak chin didn't even go to school. That's why he didn't show up until the middle of the year, and no one knew who he was or why he couldn't go into the dorm without following someone. All the notes he was taking were about my routine, maybe other girls too, but I couldn't understand why. Was it really just because I had said he was ugly? Did that send him into a month of obsession? I reported it immediately, but the university's response was inadequate. They said if I ever had a problem with it again, I should report it to the police. I guess, however, that this sick person was bored with me and my university. He was never seen again.